Good day, Thomas Jefferson Hour podcast listeners. And as always, thank you so much for listening. This week, it's our annual Jefferson Hour Christmas show.
Well, Jefferson was not a believer really in Christmas because he was pretty certain that Jesus was not born on the 25th of December. So he was a sort of scientific literalist, and he had difficulty with metaphor. And he was not a Christian in the full sense of the term. And so he frequently traveled on Christmas. He wrote letters on Christmas, but he didn't have a Yule log or a Christmas tree or Christmas gifts. It was a different era, and the Enlightenment was still very much in control of American life. And as I think I've told you in previous years, in previous Christmas shows, David, Christmas was actually banned in New England by the New England Calvinists for almost 150 years because it was thought to be a Catholic superstitious event. We've gotten a little more generous about Christmas since that time, and in Virginia there wasn't the same puritanical distaste for Christmas, but it just wasn't the big deal that it became beginning in Victorian England.
Yeah, I remember that discussion quite well.
And there's a really good book about sort of Christmas from a scientific point of view called The Physics of Christmas, and I haven't read it for many years, but we've talked about it on this show previously. There's one of the scientists in the book talks about the reindeer's red nose and shows that it was a certain type of disease that reindeer had in the North Country at that time, and so it takes every one of the Christmas traditions and tries to find a scientific explanation for it or a scientific basis for it. And I guess you could say that's the kind of thing that can ruin the Christmas cheer. But it is very interesting if you take a historical look at these things and try to unpack them. There are so many things that we do that are just hard to make sense of. Mistletoe, for example, a Christmas tradition. The Yule log, a Christmas tradition. In Britain, they have something called Boxing Day, the day after Christmas. And that's when you box up things and take gifts around to your neighbors. And, in Christmas in England, the Queen always addresses the nation, and people used to sit by with their radios and listen to the speech of the Queen, which was a huge, huge event at one time in British life, and now has faded as all such things tend to fade in the glare of secular modernity. But I'm a big sucker for Christmas. I don't care what Jefferson says. I love that Christmas softens us, if only for a few days or even a few hours. It softens us. And I think that there's no person who isn't deliberately trying to be Scrooge who can't be warmed at heart by Christmas.
And that's something I think we can all use during these trying times. It's a fun show. We make a number of phone calls. We got a request from Crisler for you to read a Christmas piece, which turns out to be a nice surprise for your daughter.
Indeed, and Brad Crisler is the one who suggested it. I was only too happy to do it, particularly because my beloved child will not be home for Christmas. By the way, that's one of my favorite Christmas songs, I'll Be Home for Christmas. Yes, you know I will. She can't come this year because of the international pandemic, and so one of our sacred rituals can't happen in quite the usual way this Christmas, and our dear friend Crisler, writing from Nashville, suggested that we do it virtually, and it turned out to be a very, very special thing. And I so appreciate your editing it to take out the all the gaffes and the sobbings. I have a basket case when it comes to this story.
Well, it really wasn't that much, but you're more than welcome, sir. It's a fun show. We have a number of phone calls to some of our Jefferson Hour favorites, including Bo Wright, who has a new dog, a new girlfriend, and he's vice mayor of Lynchburg now.
Yeah, and he talked about his own experience in the White House with Joe Biden. He worked for the Obama administration for a couple of years, and he's now the vice mayor of Lynchburg, Virginia, which he said is a city of, 80,000 people. And he said of Biden, I thought it was great, he said that he's hokey, he's long-winded, and he's prone to gaffes, but that he is a superb, world-class human being who happens also to be a politician.
So heading to the show, I know you are booked beyond belief these days. You're incredibly busy. You should take your Hamiltonian moment to tell everybody what you're up to.
More Constitution courses in the spring, so sign up for those. We had such success that some people are coming back to take it a second time. Several people said it's the best course they ever took in their life, including in college, and it has very little to do with me. I think it's this moment that we're in where the Constitution has really had a year. It's really been roughed up a little bit in the year 2020, and it's not over yet. And so I think people are more aware of these things than they usually would be. And so it's been tremendous. We also have our summer events on the Lewis and Clark Trail at Locksaw Lodge and so on. And if anyone is still interested in coming to Locksaw for Thoreau or for J. Robert Oppenheimer, we've had a couple of cancellations of people that just don't travel this year. And so if you want to come, now's the time to contact us. But they're, for me, virtually the best events of the year, and I just can't wait to get out there. It's a snowy winter paradise out there, David, 35 or 40 degrees, but snow. And the river is exactly like something you would see in the best Currier and Ives print of a river in the mountains in midwinter. So Thoreau for 4 days, and then the second one is J. Robert Oppenheimer and the making of the atomic bomb and the decision to use the atomic bomb. And I've been reading incessantly to get ready for those. So all of that's going on and more. You can see the whole list of spring and summer 2021 online courses. There will be one on Hamlet. There will be one on the Aeneid. There will be one on Oppenheimer for those who can't come to Locksaw. So watch at the Jefferson Hour site for a whole range of extraordinary possibilities. And my book on North Dakota, David, I finally finished. Merry Christmas to Me, and it'll be out on May 1st.
As Clay said, go to jeffersonhour.com to find out more details about all of his special events. And you can also support the show there by clicking on Donate. We so need it, and we so appreciate it. And with that, sir, shall we go to the show?
Indeed, and to all of you, whatever your faith, whatever your ethnicity, whatever your outlook, may this be a period of joy and gentleness and mercy and comfort to all of us. Or as Tiny Tim puts it in the Christmas Carol, God bless us, everyone.
Good day, citizens, and welcome to the Thomas Jefferson Hour, your weekly conversation about all things Jefferson. I'm your host, David Swenson, and I'm joined by the creator of the Thomas Jefferson Hour, Mr. Clay Jenkinson, and we're here this week to wish you all a Merry Christmas.
Hello to everyone. Happy holidays to everyone. This is our Christmas show. And David, I think you have brought us a special guest.
Indeed, sir, I have. On the line, we have none other than your daughter, Catherine.
Hello, happy holidays.
And can you share where you're calling from?
I'm calling to you from Oxford, England.
It's fabulous to hear your voice, Catherine. You know, when I was at Oxford a long, long time ago, I only called home, I suppose, 2 or 3 times per annum. You had to keep putting 10 pence pieces into the phone booth. Here you are. I can hear you. You're at Oxford, and I hear you as if you were next door.
It's amazing. I remember even in the last 10 years with the invention of FaceTime when it seemed like an absolute miracle, and now we do it all the time and take it for granted. But I'm thousands of miles away, but it feels like I'm in the other room because we're able to video chat, and it really makes all the difference.
It really, really does, and particularly in a year such as the one we have just gone through, a way for people to keep in touch. For people who don't know who you are, could you explain to us why you are in England?
Sure. I'm in Oxford, and I'm a PhD student studying history, and I am living here in England for several years until I finish, knock on wood. And it's been great. It's been a fabulous adventure so far. It's been a very interesting year, but I'm glad to be here.
Yes, it has been, I guess, as you say, an interesting year. But talking about the pandemic, how has that affected you?
Well, you may know that I had to return to the United States in March, which at the time I thought that I would be only coming back for 6 weeks or more, but it turned out that I stayed until mid-September and worked full-time, actually. But now I'm back in England working on my PhD although when I returned, I of course had to do a 2-week quarantine, and still we are facing the many necessary restrictions in place here. And so that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to travel right now for the holidays, because of course there's danger to travel. You don't want to be bringing anything home. And then naturally the difficulty of the 2-week quarantines. You know, David, when I first came to North Dakota for the first quarantine, my dad picked me up at the airport, sent me down to his basement, and then 3 meals a day he would come knock on the door and shove something underneath in his basement, but he wouldn't even let me come out. It was a great public health measure. It wasn't a huge welcome home, but it was the smart thing to do. And when I came back here and did the quarantine, I didn't have my dad to be shouting at me through the door. So it was a very, very different experience, and I missed him. What can I say?
Excuse me.
I mean, isn't there almost a concern, like if you did come home for Christmas, that you might not be able to get back into Britain?
Absolutely. You know, just yesterday, London went into tier 3, which is the strictest tier of lockdowns, where they now will still not be in total lockdown. Shops will be open, restaurants can be open, but only for takeaway and delivery. No indoor dining, no bars or pubs, and you're not allowed to mix with anyone from outside your household. So things are very much still in flux here, even with the arrival of the vaccine. And the universities are making plans for the spring term, and there's going to be a phased reopening with different subjects and different groups coming back at different times. So right now, for me, it seems the wisest thing to do was to stay here. But of course, I totally understand why people may have gone home for a variety of different reasons. But I'm staying put to avoid another 6 months of kind of limbo. Although I'm really grateful to have had the time at home, I now need to just work.
Well, we're recording this conversation on the 15th of December, 10 days before Christmas. Yesterday, Great Britain was the first Western nation that I know of that actually distributed the vaccine, and they vaccinated people. Can you give us a report on how that's being looked at in Britain, what people think about it?
Well, I can only speak to my friend group because, of course, conversations are very limited right now. We're not spending too much time hearing other people or strangers in coffee shops. But from what I can read and from what I know, there's general excitement that it feels like maybe the end is near, or if not the end, a brighter tomorrow. And so there's excitement about the distribution of the vaccine, and we'll be waiting in line for when our turn comes. I will certainly be waiting in line all the time. I walk by the building where penicillin was first developed and distributed, and I think about the amazing wonders of science. And this is one of the amazing wonders of science. And so I will be very excited to get my COVID vaccine, or jab as they call it here, as soon as possible, although I reckon that probably won't be at least for another few months, maybe April or later.
So you're saying that the conditions are pretty restrictive there. You called it Tier 3, and you've reported that the vaccine is being distributed and people are being vaccinated, and you called it the jab. I'm just thinking how important it is that we all stay vigilant and stay safe. You know, we're seeing this light at the end of the tunnel and hearing that this is perhaps the beginning of the end. And I was talking with a friend the other day and trying to come up with a good analogy. And the only thing I could think of was mountain climbers on Everest. You know, the most climbers die on Everest on their way down after they have, you know, achieved their goal and they're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and you sort of let your guard down a bit. So do stay safe, stay vigilant, everybody.
I certainly will, and thank you for that wonderful note of optimism.
So, Catherine, and first of all, to our listeners around the world, I want to defend myself. Yes, Catherine quarantined in a room in the basement of my house for 2 weeks. And I'll tell you how frustrating it is to try to to cook a different kind of quesadilla every day to slip under the door in that way. It turned out to be really difficult, don't you think, Catherine? The pizza didn't work at all because the pepperoni kept rolling up against the door frame.
Well, some might say that was because you were making deep dish pizza just to spite me.
Well, we have disputed.
Now, you two.
We have disputed this because I went to Chicago once. I go to Chicago a lot, but Catherine said, "Oh, Dad, you just have to get deep dish pizza." And so I got it. And the deep dish pizza is like ordering 42 pizzas. You can't eat it. You need a team. It's 2.5 inches thick. And so this has been a source of some concern. But Catherine, back to the idea of Britain and vaccines. I saw a little bit of this. I can't believe this, but I think William Shakespeare got vaccinated.
There was a William Shakespeare who got vaccinated, and, that raised a lot of questions. And I think I saw something on Twitter that said it was actually Christopher Marlowe, but somehow Shakespeare got in and took all the credit.
Wow. So a couple of things, Catherine. First of all, I know today that you quarantined when you got back, and then there have been these various lockdowns, and the shops have not been open, and although you can take walks in the parks and so on, there's no pub culture and so on. It's lifted a little bit now, and I know that today, on the 15th of December, 2020, you actually went out for supper with a couple of your friends. Can you describe what happened?
Well, the rules are very strict, and if you're eating out with anyone that you don't live with, you have to eat outside. And so that's the basic rule. There's the rule of 6. You can't meet in groups larger than 6, and you have to be outdoors. So the other rule is that if you're going to be drinking alcohol, you have to order a quote-unquote substantial meal to go along with it, and you can only imbibe during that meal. So restaurants want to stay open, and so they're following the rules meticulously, which makes perfect sense. Of course, we all have a responsibility to public health and to our communities. And so I was freezing a little bit, but I'm lucky and happy to say that the place that I was eating in had heated cushions outside to keep us warm, to help us get through the cold, the British damp cold.
So what temperature would it have been when you had this supper?
Oh, I'd say in the upper 40s.
Not to get into the weeds, and I won't ask you what you ordered, but you were able each to order an entree and a drink.
Right.
So you had your meal, and you're sitting out on heated cushions in about 45 degrees. And was it more pleasant than otherwise, or was it more uncomfortable than is useful?
It was very pleasant. The heated cushions do a lot, and of course, when social contact has been so limited, it's nice to have a chance to see people for a change. And so being able to actually be nearby and to talk with someone in a way that isn't over Zoom is so energizing that it had a warming effect, let's say.
Tell the story. I live in North Dakota. You live some of the time in North Dakota. Your supervisor at the college that you're studying at actually mentioned North Dakota the other day. North
Dakota, unfortunately, has been in the news lately because of its virus numbers. And so several people in Oxford have asked me, it's very uncommon to see someone with a North Dakota connection. And so I think that as North Dakota has been in the news and people know that I have an association with North Dakota, they've brought it up. But it's troubling to see the numbers so high. Their numbers are very high in many places across the Great Plains and all over the world. And it's very troubling, and I hate to see it.
We all do, although I must say that since a mask mandate of sorts went into effect, the numbers have started to drop some. We need to take a break. Clay, you're going to be home alone on Christmas this year.
I'm going to have my third Charles Dickens Christmas. My first one was in London when my daughter Catherine was 9. We went there, and it was a spectacular time. Although we learned that Britain shuts down over the Christmas holidays in a way that the United States does not. But again, I will be getting out my Micawber plate, and I don't feel at all sorry for myself, and I'm hoping to be able to spend some FaceTime with my daughter.
Catherine, we need to take a short break. Can you stay with us for just a minute more? I want to ask you about Christmases when you were a little girl at home.
Sure, that sounds great. Thanks.
We'll be back in just a moment with all things Christmas this week on the Thomas Jefferson Hour.
Welcome back to this special holiday edition of the Thomas Jefferson Hour. I'm Clay Jenkinson, out of character this week. The semi-permanent guest host of the Jefferson Hour is nearby, and my daughter, Catherine Missouri Walker Jenkinson, who occasionally hosts this program, is stationed today at Oxford University in Great Britain. And Catherine, I just wanted to ask you this. You're not coming home for the holidays because you're afraid if you get here, you might not get back. But what will you do for Christmas?
I think I'll just have a quiet holiday with some good food and with a few of my flatmates who will also be here. And I'll just maybe go for a walk, weather dependent, and enjoy the quiet, and certainly will FaceTime with my family for a large part of the day.
That sounds like a good plan.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
I wanted to ask you about Christmases during your childhood. I remember my father always on Christmas Eve read the Nativity story. It was like something that had to happen. And my understanding is that your father did something like that.
That's true. We would often read the Nativity story, but we also would always read through a chapter on Christmas from Little House on the Prairie, where Laura and her sister get a really important visit and treats that are unavailable for the rest of the year. And it's just such a message of gratitude and simplicity in a really beautiful way. And so my dad always reads that and is very moved by it, as are we all.
We've sort of arranged that for you. So when you listen to this program, you're going to be able to hear your father read that story. I thought you might enjoy that. A nice way for us to say Happy Christmas to you.
Oh, thank you so much. How wonderful.
And with that, please do stay safe. I look forward to another hosting from you soon, because Mr. Jefferson, as well as your father, can use that snarkiness that only you can provide. And you do it so well.
Oh, thank you. Well, I appreciate it. And I wish you a very Merry Christmas and a happy holiday season. And we can only hope and pray for a brighter and better 2021.
Well said.
Love you, my child. Have a great life.
Oh, wow. Care package is more than welcome.
Yes, we'll post your address on the website.
There you go. Great. Keep them coming. Send chocolate and Kraft macaroni.
Always great to talk with you, Catherine.
Thank you. You too, David.
It's always fun to hear from her. You must be incredibly proud of your daughter, sir.
Oh, I am. She's a block off the old chip. She's well on her way in her doctoral program.
You're speaking of her mother, I am assuming, right?
Exactly. We're dear friends. We talk every day, or almost every day, on FaceTime. And I just remember, and everyone who's old enough will remember this, that in the 1968 film 2001, A Space Odyssey, we saw that moment where the father called home on a video phone to his daughter because he had to miss her birthday. And when I saw that, I thought, that'll never happen. There'll never be video calls. That's an impossibility. And then I thought, if it ever even happened, it would be like $2,000 per call, that no one would ever be able to afford it. And now she's in Oxford, England, where I spent 4 of the most satisfying years of my life. She's at the same college I was at. She's doing a doctorate in Renaissance studies, which is what I did, although I was working in literature. And we talk for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour every day. And it's just, you just have to say it's one of the technological miracles of our time. Here's another one. This week, David, the coronavirus vaccine has begun to be distributed worldwide. In 9 months, we went from an unprecedented, unknown virus to a vaccine that's 95% effective. She walks by the Edward Jenner School every day. So think of that. She walks by the Edward Jenner Laboratory at Oxford. Edward Jenner was the man who developed the smallpox vaccine, was someone that Jefferson wrote a fan letter to. So these continuities and the sheer magnificence of science is breathtaking. And of course, the technology of cell phones, FaceTime, Zoom technology. In the face of all of that, here comes this story from a frontier moment on the Great Plains. It's a shocking thing to realize that the real meanings in life come from the very simplest relations and the very simplest stories. And so I hope people enjoy this story as much as I do, because I think that it captures the essence of Christmas almost as well as the first chapters of the book of Mark.
And, sir, in that spirit, let us present your Christmas gift to Catherine and to all of our Thomas Jefferson Hour listeners. A reading about a special Christmas from Little House on the Prairie, with special accompaniment from our good friend, Brad Crisler.
The days were short and cold. The wind whistled sharply, but there was no snow. Cold rains were falling. Day after day the rain fell, pattering on the roof and pouring from the eaves. Mary and Laura stayed close by the fire, sewing their 9-patch quilt blocks, or cutting paper dolls from scraps of wrapping paper, and hearing the wet sound of the rain. Every night was so cold that they expected to see snow next morning, but in the morning they saw only sad, wet grass. They pressed their noses against the squares of glass in the windows that Pa had made, and they were glad they could see out, but they wished they could see snow. Laura was anxious because Christmas was near, and Santa Claus and his reindeer could not travel without snow. Mary was afraid that even if it snowed, Santa Claus could not find them so far away in Indian territory. When they asked Ma about this, she said she didn't know. "What day is it?" they asked her anxiously. "How many more days till Christmas?" And they counted off the days on their fingers till there was only one more day left. Rain was still falling that morning. There was not one crack in the gray sky. They felt almost sure there would be no Christmas. Still, they kept hoping. Just before noon, the light changed. The clouds broke and drifted apart, shining white in a clear blue sky. The sun shone, birds sang, and thousands of drops of water sparkled on the grasses. But when Ma opened the door to let in the fresh, cold air, they heard the creek roaring. They had not thought about the creek. Now they knew they would have no Christmas, because Santa Claus could not cross that roaring creek. Pa came in, bringing a big, fat turkey. If it weighed less than 20 pounds, he said, he'd eat it, feathers and all. He asked Laura, "How's that for a Christmas dinner? Think you can manage one of those drumsticks?" She said yes, she could, but she was sober. Then Mary asked him if the creek was going down, and he said it was still rising. Ma said it was too bad. She hated to think of Mr. Edwards eating his bachelor cooking all alone on Christmas Day. Mr. Edwards had been asked to eat Christmas dinner with them, but Pa shook his head and said a man would risk his neck trying to cross that creek now. "No," he said, "that current's too strong. We'll just have to make up our minds that Edwards won't be here tomorrow." Of course, that meant that Santa Claus could not come either. Laura and Mary tried not to mind too much. They watched Ma dress the wild turkey, and it was a very fat turkey. They were lucky little girls to have a good house to live in and a warm fire to sit by, and such a turkey for their Christmas dinner. Ma said so, and it was true. Ma said it was too bad that Santa Claus couldn't come this year, but they were such good girls that he hadn't forgotten them. He would surely come next year. Still, they were not happy. After supper that night, they washed their hands and faces, buttoned their red flannel nightgowns, tied their nightcap strings, and soberly said their prayers. They lay down in bed and pulled the covers up. It did not seem at all like Christmas time. Pa and Ma sat silent by the fire. After a while, Ma asked why Pa didn't play the fiddle, and he said, "I don't seem to have the heart to, Caroline." After a longer while, Ma suddenly stood up. "I'm going to hang up your stockings, girls," she said. "Maybe something will happen." Laura's heart jumped, but then she thought again of the creek, and she knew nothing could happen. Ma took one of Mary's clean stockings and one of Laura's, and she hung them from the mantel shelf on either side of the fireplace. Laura and Mary watched her over the edge of their bed covers. "Now go to sleep," Ma said, kissing them good night. "Morning will come quicker if you're asleep." She sat down again by the fire, and Laura almost went to sleep. She woke up a little when she heard Pa say, "You only made it worse, Caroline." She thought she heard Ma say, "No, Charles, there's the white sugar." But perhaps she was dreaming. Then she heard Jack growl savagely. The door latch rattled and someone said, "Ingalls! Ingalls!" Pa was stirring up the fire, and when he opened the door, Laura saw that it was morning. "Great fishhooks, Edwards! Come in, man! What's happened?" Pa exclaimed. Laura saw the stockings limply dangling, and she scrooged her shut eyes into the pillow. She heard Pa piling wood on the fire, and she heard Mr. Edwards say that he had carried his clothes on his head when he swam the creek. His teeth rattled, and his voice shivered. "It would be all right," he said, as soon as he got warm. "It was too big a risk, Edwards," Pa said. "We're glad you're here, but that was too big a risk for a Christmas dinner." "Your little ones had to have a Christmas," Mr. Edwards replied. "No creek could stop me, and I fetched them their gifts from Independence." Laura sat straight up in bed. "Did you see Santa Claus?" she shouted. "I sure did," Mr. Edwards said. "Where? When? What did he look like? What did he say? Did he really give you something for us?" Mary and Laura cried. Wait a minute," Mr. Edwards laughed, and Ma said she would put the presents in the stockings as Santa intended. She said they mustn't look. Mr. Edwards came and sat on the floor by their bed, and he answered every question they asked him. They honestly tried not to look at Ma, and they didn't quite see what she was doing. When he saw the creek rising, Mr. Edwards said he had known that Santa Claus could not get across it. "But you crossed it," Laura said. "Yes," Mr. Edwards replied, "but Santa Claus is too old and fat. He couldn't make it, where a long, lean razorback like me could do so." And Mr. Edwards reasoned that if Santa Claus couldn't cross the creek, likely he would come no farther south than Independence. Why should he come 40 miles across the prairie only to be turned back? Of course he wouldn't do that. So Mr. Edwards had walked to Independence. "In the rain?" Mary asked. Mr. Edwards said he wore his rubber coat. And there, coming down the street in Independence, he had met Santa Claus. "In the daytime?" Laura asked. She hadn't thought that anyone could see Santa Claus in the daytime. No, Mr. Edwards said, it was night, but light shone out across the street from the saloons. Well, the first thing Santa Claus said was, "Hello, Edwards." "Did he know you?" Mary asked. And Laura asked, "How did you know he was really Santa Claus?" Mr. Edwards said that Santa Claus knew everybody, and he had recognized Santa at once by his whiskers. Santa Claus had the longest, thickest, whitest set of whiskers west of the Mississippi. So Santa Claus said, "Hello, Edwards. Last time I saw you, you were sleeping on a corn shuck bed in Tennessee." And Mr. Edwards well remembered the little pair of red yarn mittens that Santa Claus had left him that time. Then Santa Claus asked, "I understand you're living now down on the Verdigris River. Have you ever met up down yonder with two little young girls named Mary and Laura?" "I surely am acquainted with them," Mr. Edwards replied. "It rests heavy on my mind," said Santa Claus. "They are both of them sweet, pretty, good little young things, and I know they're expecting me. I surely do hate to disappoint two good little girls like them. Yet with the water up the way it is, I can't ever make it across that creek. I can figure no way whatsoever to get to their cabin this year, Edwards. Would you do me the favor to fetch them their gifts this one time?" "I'll do that, with pleasure," Mr. Edwards told him. Then Santa Claus and Mr. Edwards stepped across the street to the hitching posts where the pack mule was tied. "Didn't he have his reindeer?" Laura asked. "You know he couldn't," Mary said. "There isn't any snow." "Exactly," said Mr. Edwards. Santa Claus traveled with a pack mule in the Southwest. And Santa Claus unhitched the pack and looked through it, and he took out the presents for Mary and Laura. "Oh, what are they?" Laura cried, but Mary asked, "Then what did he do?" Then he shook hands with Mr. Edwards, and he swung up on his fine bay horse. Santa Claus rode well for a man of his weight and build, and he tucked his long white whiskers under his bandana. "So long, Edwards," he said, and he rode away on the Fort Dodge trail, leading his pack mule and whistling. Laura and Mary were silent an instant, thinking of that. Then Ma said, "You may look now, girls." Something was shining bright in the top of Laura's stocking. She squealed and jumped out of bed. So did Mary, but Laura beat her to the fireplace, and the shining thing was a glittering new tin cup. Mary had one exactly like it. These new tin cups were their very own. Now they each had a cup to drink out of. Laura jumped up and down and shouted and laughed, but Mary stood still and looked with shining eyes at her own tin cup. Then they plunged their hands into the stockings again, and they pulled out two long, long sticks of candy. It was peppermint candy, striped red and white. They looked and looked at the beautiful candy, and Laura licked her stick just one lick. But Mary was not so greedy. She didn't take even one lick of her stick. Those stockings weren't empty yet. Mary and Laura pulled out 2 small packages. They unwrapped them, and each found a little heart-shaped cake. Over their delicate brown tops was sprinkled white sugar. The sparkling grains lay like tiny drifts of snow. The cakes were too pretty to eat. Mary and Laura just looked at them. But at last Laura turned hers over, and she nibbled a tiny nibble from underneath where it wouldn't show, and the inside of the little cake was white. It had been made of pure white flour and sweetened with white sugar. Laura and Mary never would have looked into their stockings again. The cups and the cakes and the candy were almost too much. They were too happy to speak. But Ma asked if they were sure the stockings were empty. Then they put their hands down inside them to make sure. And in the very toe of each stocking was a shining, bright new penny. They had never even thought of such a thing as having a penny. Think of having a whole penny for your very own. Think of having a cup and a cake and a stick of candy and a penny. There had never been such a Christmas. Now, of course, right away, Laura and Mary should have thanked Mr. Edwards for bringing those lovely presents all the way from Independence. But they had forgotten all about Mr. Edwards. They had even forgotten Santa Claus. In a minute they would have remembered, but before they did, Ma said gently, "Aren't you going to thank Mr. Edwards?" "Oh, thank you, Mr. Edwards, thank you," they said, and they meant it with all their hearts. Pa shook Mr. Edwards' hand too, and shook it again. Pa and Ma and Mr. Edwards acted as if they were almost crying. Laura didn't know why. So she gazed again at her beautiful presents. She looked up again when Ma gasped, and Mr. Edwards was taking sweet potatoes out of his pockets. He said they had helped to balance the package on his head when he swam across the creek. He thought Pa and Ma might like them with the Christmas turkey. There were 9 sweet potatoes. Mr. Edwards had brought them all the way from town, too. It was just too much. Pa said so. "It's too much, Edwards," he said. They never could thank him enough. Mary and Laura were too excited to eat breakfast. They drank the milk from their shining new cups, but they could not swallow the rabbit stew and the cornmeal mush. "Don't make them, Charles," Ma said. "It will soon be dinner time." For Christmas dinner, there was the tender, juicy roasted turkey. There were the sweet potatoes baked in the ashes and carefully wiped so that you could eat the good skins, too. There was a loaf of salt-rising bread made from the last of the white flour. And after all that, there were stewed dried blackberries and little cakes. But these little cakes were made with brown sugar, and they did not have white sugar sprinkled over their tops. Then Pa and Ma and Mr. Edwards sat by the fire and talked about Christmas times back in Tennessee and up north in the big woods. But Mary and Laura looked at their beautiful cakes and played with their pennies and drank their water out of their new cups. And little by little they licked and sucked their sticks of candy till each stick was sharp-pointed on one end. That was a happy Christmas. Merry Christmas to everybody. Happy holidays. May whatever is still innocent in your hearts find expression in this most difficult of years, 2020.
Welcome back to the Thomas Jefferson Hour, your weekly conversation with or about President Thomas Jefferson, about all things Jefferson. And this week it's about all things Christmas. And on the line we have our good friend. It's been too long since we've talked to you, sir. Mr. Bo Wright, how are you?
Well, it is so good to talk with both of you. I'm doing well, and I hope that you are too.
We're staying as vigilant as we can, sir.
Bo, this is Clay. Turns out there is a Santa Claus, by which I mean that after one of the most contested periods in American history, the Constitution guardrails held, and it's not a partisan question, but we have successfully begun the transfer of power from one administration to another, something that could not necessarily have been predicted 3 months ago.
No, that's true. And while the guardrails of democracy did hold this time around, I think we need to also recognize the degree to which they were tested over the past several months. I mean, it is unprecedented for no matter your political party for a president to cast such grave doubt on the fairness of an election without proof, and then to watch as his party, not exclusively, but to a large degree, sort of fall in line behind a narrative. I think that was meant to disrupt the normal functioning of democracy. So I think that this election, while yes, the guardrails held, should, I think, inspire us to sort of re-examine our dedication to sort of these pretty foundational principles like free and fair elections.
I regard the survival of the constitutional way of life, irrespective of party affiliations, as one of the great triumphs at the end of this year. And here's another one. On the same day that the Electoral College met, the first Americans were inoculated with the COVID-19 vaccine. There's a triumph for science and technology.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think, 2020 has been a year that has really tested our national character. But we have, I think, much to be both proud of and excited for in 2021.
So what's going on in your world? You're continuing to try to save the world one day at a time.
Yeah. Well, so I have a new dog, which is very exciting, and it's I'm sure what you want to hear about. And today is my girlfriend's birthday, which is also very exciting. And then otherwise, I'm sort of humming away here in Lynchburg, Virginia. I'm on our city council, and I just started a term as vice mayor. So there's always a lot to do in a growing city of 80,000. We're projected to be up to 100,000 here in the next 20 years. So it's pretty dynamic and exciting.
Does the vice mayor then become mayor?
Not necessarily. I would have to both impress the voters once again. They would have to choose me to serve on city council in 2 years' time, and then my colleagues would need to select me to be mayor. So we'll see if that happens. Certainly not counting my chickens. I think I've just got to do a good job this go around.
How many people do you think lived there when Jefferson lived there?
That is such a good question. So Lynchburg was incorporated in 1786. Thomas Jefferson, and you know better, play the specific years of when he built Poplar Forest, but I think it was in the order of several hundred to several thousand by the time Poplar Forest was completed.
So he started building Poplar Forest around 1806, but he actually finished his book, Notes on the State of Virginia, at his plantation in Bedford, and that was 1781. So he was going there. He inherited this via his wife, Martha, and so he was going there from the 1770s on, but he didn't really begin to make it a destination in his life until about the time he was leaving the U.S. presidency. And the sense you get from reading the accounts of it, Bo, is that there wasn't much going on, that it was an isolated plantation, and Bedford did not have a vice mayor, I can put it that way.
No, I don't think so, though. Of course, Lynchburg is very proud of our association with President Jefferson, and they're actually, for folks who might be passing through the area, Poplar Forest has just been doing just some really amazing, groundbreaking research and restoration at Poplar Forest, and it really is worth taking the time to stop by and visit. We would love to have anybody and everybody.
Bo, as you know, this is our annual Thomas Jefferson Hour Christmas show.
Yeah.
And as you probably also know, it's always a bit difficult to talk to President Jefferson about Christmas. He sort of comes off kind of as a
bah humbug.
He, as we all know, Jefferson Hour listeners know, President Jefferson did not celebrate Christmas. Because it's our Christmas show, what sort of thoughts do you have on that subject, sir?
There are certainly timeless values that at least in my family, we associate with Christmas. We associate generosity and family. And I think, regardless of whether you are celebrating Christmas for the religious meaning, or these, I think, sort of more even secular values, it is still a worthwhile holiday, and an opportunity to reflect on the year and think about the one to come. I would hope that President Jefferson, were he here today, might have revised his opinion somewhat of the holiday and come to embrace it for all the good that it does entail.
So, Bo, will you celebrate the holidays with family? What will you do for this holiday?
Well, it's a COVID Christmas, so I will spend it with with a few members of my family. They're not all of them. With my folks and one of my brothers and his family, and my girlfriend, and we will unwrap a few presents and make traditional meals. We always watch It's a Wonderful Life, the Jimmy Stewart classic from the mid 1940s. We watch that every year, so I've seen it now 30 plus times, and we'll see it once more this year. So it should be really nice. We always have potato soup and an old Wright family recipe for dessert, which is gelatin with peaches and custard. So that's what I have to look forward to.
Well, it's Little House in Bedford County.
I don't know it.
So, Bo, let me ask you this. I know you worked in the Obama administration, so you know Joe Biden. You've been in the room with Joe Biden. Give us a little sense of your own understanding of his ways and means and the kind of person he is behind closed doors.
Yeah, so I actually had the opportunity back 8 years ago now. I worked for him for about 6 months. I did advance work for him. So I traveled across the country in advance of the vice president, preparing events for him. And then he would fly in, he would do the event, and then usually leave. But I got to see him, up close and personal. I didn't get to know him or anything. He didn't know my name, but I got to see him both, in front of the stage and behind it. And what I learned was that, you are seeing the real Joe Biden on stage. Kind of hokey, long-winded, makes gaffes. That's the real Joe Biden. But he is a man of real integrity, and he really wants to do the right thing by the American people. If you don't mind, I'll just tell a quick story. My first trip was to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and he was going to be giving a speech at a factory. And part of my job was to make sure that there's a makeup artist in place. He was going to go out and give a speech, and then he was going to come back, have a little on-camera sort of makeup applied. My job was to make sure that the makeup artist was in place to apply the makeup, and she was a local. She wasn't affiliated with the administration at all. And I remember he came around the corner. It's the first time I'd ever seen him up close. And he comes around the corner into this cubicle, because we were using like the executive office space of this factory for the makeup. And so she comes into the cubicle and he sits down. And for the next 15 minutes, he talks with her. He asks her about her life and her family. They're chit-chatting about her dad and how he used to play minor league baseball. And then before he gets up from the chair, he says, "Hey, can we call your dad?" And she's like, "Sure." And so she hands over her phone, and they call her dad. And he says, "Hey, Dad, it's Joe Biden. I'm here with your daughter. I just want to tell you, you have a great daughter. I've got 2 boys. I'm really proud of them, blah, blah, blah." And he spends, another 5 minutes or so talking with this dad and giving this family a shared memory that they will always have about the time, the Vice President of the United States spent time with their daughter and gave them sort of shared family memory. And there's nobody else watching this, right? It was just me, the president or the Vice President's Secret Service. And to me, that said a lot about his character and about how he views public service and leadership, that it really is all about people. I mean, he could have ignored her or just been polite, but not warm and empathetic. And this is a man who's been in public life now for almost 50 years. And I think it says something about him that he is still so deeply interested in people and their concerns and their daily lives. So I'm sorry, that was a long-winded way of saying, setting aside his policies, I think that we have a person coming to the White House who is a genuinely decent, kind, and now, happily experienced person.
So what a wonderful Christmas story, actually. And that, forget politics, I think you said that he was hokey, long-winded, and prone to gaffes, but he also is this deep and warm human being who's suffered a great deal and brings that level, you can see it in his face, he brings that level of humanity to everything he does.
Hey, Bo, thanks so much for taking some time to talk with us today, and you have yourself a wonderful holiday.
Well, you all do the same, and really, thanks ever so much for all you do. You're a beacon of light, guys.
Before you go, it's been a really tough year for all of us. Do you have any optimism you'd like to share with us for 2021?
Yeah, I do. And actually, first, if I could just say, and this is just really for you two, I think, if you don't mind my saying so, your cheeks may sort of grow red with embarrassment, but the Thomas Jefferson Hour this year has been a real gift, I think, for me anyway, because it has remained, a sort of a little sanctum sanctorum of civility and generosity and wisdom in a world that feels as though it's kind of gone crazy. So I just want to say to both of you, thank you for
thank you.
For episodes that have really, sort of kept my faith in the American experiment alive at times when it's really felt tested. But I do have hope for 2021, not just because I think we have an administration that's coming in, setting aside your sort of views on their policies. I think we have an administration that's coming in that's just not going to generate the this sort of soul-crushing drama of the past couple of years, and I think we can look forward to several years, at least, of stable leadership, though certainly on a lot of partisan shenanigans. And of course, we have, the COVID vaccine, which is now being rolled out. In fact, the first tests the first vaccines were administered today in Lynchburg, which is very exciting. So, I think we are looking forward to a return to some normalcy in 2021, including, and I think importantly, a world where we don't have to think about the president of the United States every single day. It's okay for government to be boring. It doesn't have to be the most exciting thing in our lives. It doesn't have to be a contact sport. And so I, for one, am very much looking forward to that.
Thanks, Bo. It's always great to talk to you. We are now joined by another special friend of the Thomas Jefferson Hour, the gentleman who provided the accompanying music for your Christmas read, Clay, Mr. Brad Crisler. And thanks so much for doing that, Brad. I understand this story goes quite far back with your family.
I remember the first time I heard Clay read this story, I was in a field in the middle of England metal detecting, and I was listening to the podcast as I metal detected, and I just remember it being so poignant, and remember that we used to read the same story to our girls. And I told my girls about it, and my oldest daughter actually kind of had tears in her eyes. So we're going to follow along and read the book as Clay reads. So I'm just glad it's a encouraging, calming story, and I just appreciate Clay being willing to do it again. It's a tradition worth renewing.
The reason this story resonates, and I'm sure it did with you and your children and your wife, is that it's so deeply authentic about a time when life was simple and sort of difficult, but people had such a deep well of goodwill.
Yeah, I have to agree. And I guess, like you all, my hope is that 2021 and the coming year, that in some of those areas we can move toward reconciliation. We have hope. We have a vaccine. We have a new, fresh administration. And I just would hope that the new year would bring some reconciliation and deeper understanding of people that I disagree with, which is always a worthy endeavor. And so we have to, I think, look toward the new year with hope. And I think this kind of story of simple caring for one another is a good place to start. I appreciate you doing it.
So what's your message to the world here? I know that's a big question, but as 2021 begins, it's Christmas season. It's a time for us to try to seek out our most generous selves. What's your hope for 2021 in Nashville, in Tennessee, and in America?
I think it's a tall order. This year has made a cynic out of the most hopeful and optimistic of us. And so my prayer and hope is that we all can recover some sense of community and decency toward one another. I think for me and for my family personally, on January 21st, I'm turning off all media. I'm withdrawing from Facebook and Twitter and all those things that I've used to engage and follow, this very anxiety-producing year. I'm turning all of those things off and turning inward into my own community, and at least making the first 6 months of this next year about the people in my sphere of influence, the people who are my neighbors, my actual neighbors, the people that I can be kind to, and there are plenty of people in the middle of Nashville, that disagree, that have a different worldview than I do, and I just want to seek to understand better and to better serve and be a part of the lives of the people in my immediate community, and then let the national discourse kind of rest and be what it is. And I feel like if we all kind of did that, we would recognize that we're all human and we all have the same basic needs, and we all love our children. We all want a better future, and we all love America. And I think if we could understand that on a face-to-face level, then it would be much harder to demonize one another. And that's my goal for the next year, and my prayer for each of our listeners too.
Brad, you are a great friend to the Thomas Jefferson Hour and a man with great insight, and we so appreciate you taking time to talk to us this week. Merry Christmas to you and yours, sir, and stay safe.
All right, take care.
As always, thank you for listening to the Thomas Jefferson Hour. Please join us again next week for another exciting edition of the Thomas Jefferson Hour.
The Thomas Jefferson Hour is brought to you each week by Dakota Sky Education. The program is distributed nationally by Prairie Public. President Thomas Jefferson lived from 1743 to 1826, and this program presents his views. President Jefferson is portrayed by the award-winning humanities scholar and author Clay S. Jenkinson. To obtain a copy of this or any show for a $12 donation, please call 701-575-0727. This program is also available online at jeffersonhour.com and on Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to correspond with President Jefferson or submit a question for him to answer on the program, please visit the website at jeffersonhour.com. The Thomas Jefferson Hour is produced at Makoche Recording Studios in Bismarck, North Dakota. Bach Cello Suite No. 3 in C Major by Stephen Swinford. Thank you for listening. Please tune in again next week for another thought-provoking, historically accurate program, Through the Eyes of Thomas Jefferson.